Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Auxis Corporate Performance Series webinar, Process Framework, Understanding Your Business Anatomy. My name's Yaslin Arroyo, and I'm the moderator for today's webinar. Today's webinar is presented by Auxis. Auxis is a very different consulting and outsourcing firm comprised of former industry professionals who don't act like traditional consultants. Offering a customized, real-world, results-oriented approach, we become ingrained in our clients' culture and vision and truly dedicated to their success. Our depth of experience allows us to operate under a very different leverage model and maintain a focus on customization, flexibility, and bottom-line results at a very competitive cost structure. At this point, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Ricardo Villeda. Ricardo is a senior manager for the management consulting practice at Auxis. He is an action-oriented executive with 17 years of experience developing superior business capacity for organizations. He has hands-on experience improving operations in sales, marketing, product development, engineering, quality, warehousing, and organizational development. Ricardo is also a Japan-trained master in lean thinking and certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Additionally, he's certified as both a supply chain professional and as a project management professional. Before we begin, let me remind all participants we welcome your questions. Please submit them in your webinar panel at any time, and we'll address your questions at the conclusion of the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speaker, Ricardo. Ricardo?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Once again, thanks, Yaslin. That was a nice introduction. So looking at my career so far, what I've loved doing has been helping others see opportunities in their operation and then streamlining their flows to get better results. I've been doing this by partnering with business unit leaders in all different parts of a business, rolling up my sleeves and making it happen. And I've been lucky to work inside very different industries. I've worked in the apparel and textile industry, in the electronics and electrical equipment manufacturing, in the chemical products industry, in the software and service industry, in retail, in the hospitality industry, plenty of different industries, as well as, different places around the globe. I worked under very different cultural settings. And I continue to use this experience, to understand and conceptualize what it takes to be successful in fulfilling customer expectations. So our talk today will be focused on how most organizations could benefit from defining a process framework, promoting process thinking, and enabling continuous improvement to deliver their specific strategy. So, would you normally try to fit a square peg in a round hole? You wouldn't, would you? Well, how do you know this is not the case regarding your organization and strategy set? Your organization structure needs to be perfectly aligned with your strategy, or at least you should be working that direction. The number of resources, the tools you used, the projects underway, the KPIs you're using to measure performance, it all needs to align. Your trusted resources want to help you achieve your goals. They're doing so right now. They do what they consider best. But if two parts of the organization are working in directions opposed to each other or opposed to the strategy, it could mean slower progress or even missing your goal. Now, most people can failure, but nobody likes to be part of a losing team. So, what if I tell you that typically people could use three different views of an operation? One, what you think it looks like. Two, what the organization or process you're looking at should look like. And three, what it really looks like. Delivering on a strategy is hard enough. What if you were trying to do so without really knowing your organization and what levers to pull? How aware are you of the inner workings of your business? You might be doing a great job in outlining the vision for the business and your associates, but how well are you able to influence the alignment and performance of all key areas required to deliver your proposed vision? The level of control that you have over this alignment will dictate your ability to deliver on your promise. You can trust your people to follow your vision, but because they have certain cognitive limitations, they will be constrained and in fact motivated to focus strictly on their area with little regard for impacting to others. So you're responsible for the entire operation, and you will need confirmation that the enterprise as a system is working together rather than apart. But what tools could one use to help you see discrepancies early on? How could one see how the organization's inner workings are structured? How are the different parts of this working together and performing? Most people, are usually satisfied with an org chart and financial results. But if you want to understand the mechanisms that result in that org chart or result in those particular, performance results, you should put together a process framework. Could you be trying to fit a square peg in a round hole? You could be if you're not careful. So, putting together a clear process framework along with a clear strategy are two important steps to uncover the path to success. We suggest that as enablers of success, you 1, define a vision and a strategy to go after the vision. 2, define a process framework to encourage process thinking in your organization. 3, define the assignments to drive accountability. And 4, define the metrics to measure your progress towards your goals. The strategy and vision will clarify your purpose, while the process framework will clarify, what tools you use to deliver on that strategy. By going through this exercise, you will learn whether and how to focus your resources to drive change, improvements, and execution. Creating and using a process framework has numerous benefits. Let me mention a few here. These include an improved ability to communicate information about processes quickly and clearly among managers, functions, information systems, and external partners. You can now, with this process framework, point to specific parts of the operation that you can use to clarify an assignment or task. You will experience improved accountability for results by having clear responsibilities laid out for anyone to see. You will be able to define more easily where to focus improvement efforts. For example, by developing a scorecard using this framework, areas with issues will pop out. The areas needing development and focus to deliver the strategy will be clearly marked from the outset, and the follow-up efforts in all these improvements will really benefit from this increased level of visibility. There will also be a clearer definition of input and output requirements between parts of the value chain. You can enable your teams to specify their required inputs as well as expected outputs. This is especially useful for all those internal customer relationships within an organization. If you have identified gaps to be closed with either systems or equipment or other types of improvement, you will be prepared to give a clear definition of the requirements for the design and implementation of these solutions. If you're in the process of implementing a company-wide initiative or information system, or if you're integrating an acquisition, having a process framework will contribute greatly. These projects will be much more clear and straightforward. And finally, since creating a process framework starts you on a continuous improvement journey, having one sets you up for further process definition and standardization, turning tribal knowledge into documented, repeatable processes. Before continuing, I'd like to share 3 examples of companies where process thinking and improvement is part of the culture. All 3 have been able to harness their process backbone and exploit it using a deliberate approach to process and performance improvement. And this has resulted in profits and growth. I specifically selected these companies since they are conglomerates of smaller organizations selling into mature markets. They offer a large variety of products into a variety of industries and markets. What it boils down to is that this mix of process thinking with a deliberate focus on performance improvement works in any industry to drive significant value for stockholders. The leaders at these 3 enterprises face the challenge of delivering on a profitable growth strategy, doing so on a global footprint, in a multitude of environments, with a multicultural workforce, while merging in acquisitions, and with a product portfolio that is at least partially commoditized. This means that they're facing stiff competition from global players that have access to low-cost workforces. That's quite a challenge. Anyway, let's take a look at the record of their performance. The first one I want to talk about is Illinois Toolworks. This is the stock price performance. This is a company that's more than a century old. It was founded in 1912 and it's based in Glenview, Illinois. As you can clearly see, it has clearly outpaced the performance of the market, which is depicted by the S&P 500 index using the red line. If you had invested in this company 15 years ago, even with the two significant recessions that happened during this period, you would have tripled your money. ITW has an intentional focus on driving improvement with two simple mantras, 80-20 and understand, simplify, and automate. 80-20, as you can imagine, if you heard of the Pareto principle, is about focusing on what counts, separating the vital few from the rest. Understand, simplify, and automate is what they do to processes over time. They look at an operations processes and in a deliberate fashion, they take out waste. Over time, they've acquired hundreds of businesses with margins in the single digits and turned them into double-digit margin profit churning machines. Years of acquisitions later, they're a group of about 800 divisions split into 7 different segments, and they continue to look for ways to focus and improve. I think that they're currently working to even narrow that that 800 division down to focus even more on what's generating the most growth and the best margins for them. Let's take a look at the next one. Eaton Corporation has been another great example of success for companies that drive process thinking and lean thinking into their culture. They continue to consider themselves a technology leader, even when they were founded more than a century ago. They can do this because they continue to apply relentless focus on waste reduction and innovation, evident in their ability to adapt to changing times. As you can see on the chart here, an investment of $100,000 in January of 2000 would have turned into $400,000 by now. That's not a bad return at all. These returns come from Eaton Associates practicing lean enterprise thinking, which is built on process thinking, evidence of which can be seen in a tool of methodology that lean practitioners use called standard work. Eaton says the following in their website: lean enterprise is both a tool and a value system towards achieving our vision of leadership, adopted throughout Eaton as a fundamental basis for our success. Lean enterprise is based on the core belief of continuous improvement being required by all business processes. What I can share about lean right now that ties directly to use of a process framework is at the core of lean, you try to answer 6 questions, okay? Who's my customer? What do they value? What processes do I use to deliver that value? What do I measure for these processes? And how am I performing? When you put together your process framework, you get to answer most of these questions. The prime example of a company built around process thinking and deliberatively reducing waste is Danaher. They adopted this way of thinking in the 80s, and now it's part of their corporate DNA. I learned my my lean background from some practitioners of the Danaher business system. In their corporate website, they say that the Danaher business system, or DBS, is who they are and how we do what we do. They are pretty clear about it, and they're relentless about pushing this into new organizations. You can see that a $100,000 investment in January 2000 would have turned into a whopping $700,000 now. These are stellar results. There are other examples of this where an organization identifies what it wants to be to whom, a customer, and then aligns all of their processes to deliver value from a customer's perspective. Having a process framework enables this by making process thinking a tangible exercise for managers. It's not a concept anymore when you have a list of processes and someone's name next to them listed as a process owner. Then your job becomes improving how those processes are done, so all waste and variation gets taken out. An example of other companies using this, UPS, for example, uses a process framework to reduce complexity in their business and to communicate. And they use it for, for project management purposes. As a result, UPS has been able to reduce project management costs by 40%, increase its effectiveness in delivering to planned scope by 30%. So I hope you see the link between creating your own process framework and more effective operations, better process improvement efforts, and improved bottom line results. Let's talk about how to put one of these process frameworks together. So as you can see in the detail of this table, just kidding, I know you can't see the detail. This is intentional, since the information captured here in this process framework has to be specific to your own company, and showing somebody else's information is not going to help you that much. So we will use this as just a backdrop to explain the general structure of the process framework. So bear with me for a moment. More than a document or tool, a process framework is a way of looking at an organization. It enables process thinking, abstracting the activities a business performs into a series of steps that take input and turns them into outputs. A comprehensive process framework describes your current organization, the process it uses to deliver value to the customer, and how the individual parts perform at doing this. Financial reports and org chart help you see the big picture, but a process framework can help you and your team discover the detail and identify what levers you must pull to deliver on your promises. This view of the organization gets captured in a document or group of documents that you can put to real use. The main document looks like this table here, where you have a list of processes listed out in rows and with attributes for each process defined in columns. It's like a database of information for all the processes in your organization. There are also underlying documents like process maps and standard operating procedures, etc., that go under it, policies and such, that we are not going to really get into in this presentation. But putting this initial table together will help you and your team get very far in terms of understanding your organization's inner workings much better. A process framework starts with a list of processes in some type of hierarchical order. If you are defining the list from scratch and through interviews with people in your organization, a classification system or taxonomy will have to be agreed upon so as that future processes get uncovered, they get a valid and appropriate home. In this example, I list the processes associated with invoicing, credit, and collections. As you can see, this list includes managing and performing collections, escalating issues, reviewing credit from new accounts, generating customer statements, etc. This is a key cash flow impacting process group that your business might or might not be leveraging or might not be improving deliberately at this point in time. And I don't know, it might surprise you, but I get to meet organizations that don't have a deliberate way of enabling the credit and collections team to reduce their cycle times, to improve their productivity and effectiveness, and improve their contribution to the cash conversion cycle. It might be due to a lack of visibility of this process, or because the whole operation is not talked about as much as sales and marketing, for example. So having this process group in a process framework will allow you and your team to learn significant detail about each of these processes, and with this information lay out a clear plan on how to improve the invoicing, credit, and collections operation. So let's move into that. For each process listed, you would then start to capture information related to it, information that identifies it, enables clear accountability, and defines success. For example, for each process, you would identify what process group it belongs to, what name of the process it is, and any sub-processes under it. For each sub-process, you would define who the process owner is, maybe who the subject matter expert is, who the supervisor is, the person executing, and any useful notes about the sub-process. You could also identify what KPIs are being used to measure the process, and even how the process is performing, whether it's meeting specs or not. You would also be able to identify how it's meeting the current service level, what the frequency that this process is performed, maybe your monthly transaction volume, when the peak season is, what the current processing time is. Additional detail I've also seen captured in the past includes, what are typical reports generated, what system or technology is used, whether there are any flowchart or SOP available as reference to review, what are the key inputs into this process. So you can see a lot of information gets captured here. It's really useful when it comes time to drive improvement in an organization. This could even, lead to determine, okay, is this process or this group of activities good candidates for a shared service center, for example. So those are the kind of items that you would capture in a process framework. The entire exercise is flexes to your particular situation, strategy, and needs. You should start with readily available information. So have your teams meet and provide whatever information they have available based on their current experience, provide it to you now. And if you feel appropriate along the way, you can capture information about what are your current opportunities and challenges. What are some things that you could do from an internal standpoint to drive improvement, to facilitate the process, to make it simpler. So this really starts your team to start thinking in terms of process. It starts to drive that continuous improvement mindset. So let's move into talking about how to use this process framework. Okay. Once you have this database of process information built up, you can start to use it or parts of this document to accomplish multiple tasks, included but not limited to the ones listed here, like communicating process requirements, like what are the required inputs to get this job done right the first time, and what's the expected shape of the output. Who is responsible for this, and what are the results so far, and what are you doing to drive improvement on those results. Where do I focus my continuous improvement team? What efforts or what projects I should be using to drive improvement in a certain area. Improving your ability to identify unnecessary complexity. Improving your ability to identify a lack of focus in your organization or a lack of alignment behind your strategy. You can use it to improve your ability to better define requirements for solutions. I mentioned this before. When you're looking for a solution for, I don't know, pricing, or a solution to expedite a certain part of the process, you'll have how the different areas communicate and what are the inputs required, and you'll be able to point it on a sheet of paper to show people. It improves your ability to integrate new business, new initiatives, and new systems. How many times, have I been involved with two organizations where one acquired the other, and now we need to do process jointly, and okay, so what do you do? Okay, well, the what do you do is already defined. If you have one of these, it's clear and evident on a piece of paper, and you can share it between companies. And there's anyway, many other uses. So let's look at a couple of examples. In this case, we use the process framework as a project tracker. Particular areas in your business will be running projects. So let's say that you're interested in a couple of areas. You'll be able to see what type of projects people are working on to see if they're aligned with your strategy or the strategy you communicated to people. You can also use it to get an update on whether the projects are on track or not. In addition, if you can immediately see which ones are behind and can see the expected impact to either the P&L or the balance sheet, you can use this information to determine your next steps in managing people's expectations, whether you need to update your plan or whether you want to intervene in the projects. In this particular example, you can see that a project is significantly delayed. It was supposed to have an impact on margins, so you might decide to add additional resources or increase the priority of this project for the people involved, or even evaluate what you must do to manage people's expectations in terms of what they can expect on the results. Another example of how you can use this framework is to reduce complexity. Once you have the process framework built up, you can start to see, well, how complex is my organization? In this particular example, how many processes fall inside some of these process groups. In this case, sales order processing has 16 sub-processes under it. That should tell you something about how complex your organization is, and obviously by reducing complexity, you'll be reducing costs. So this is another way that I've seen process framework being used. Another way of using the framework is as a performance dashboard. You could ask the finance team or any part of the business to present the way they're currently measuring key internal processes and whether they're meeting expectations and goals. In this case, the finance team selected to measure generating financial statements, closing the books, analyzing open tenders, and submitting proposals for bids as key internal customer services that they provide. They chose to measure on-time delivery for the statements, which they seem to be hitting. They also selected lead time to be a measure of how they close the books. For this particular measure, they seem to have missed the goal. So at this point in time, you could engage the finance team to tell you whether, is this a typical situation? What are the trends for these metrics? What have been the root causes for missing lead time goals? How long have you guys had the same goal, etc., and so on. So this, helps drive, the continuous improvement in specific areas as the leader. Here's another example. So I know you will have projects where you want to deploy throughout your entire organization across all different areas. Projects like a documentation process or a project to install an ERP or a particular IT solution. So having a process framework allows you to first identify what process will be impacted by this solution, or what processes need to be modified or changed or involved or migrated or connected with this related to this new solution or system. And then you can set dates for when this is going to happen. You can then track to see whether the project is on track and hitting the areas you intended to hit to make sure that you're covering the entire scope. In this particular example, it was a documentation process. You can see that some areas were planned to be documented. Some areas, when we looked at this document, had already been documented. So it helps you see, the progress of that. So in addition to seeing the progress of the initiative, using this document, I can see what map or standard operating procedure I could use as a reference to train associates on whatever changes were introduced. And the beauty is it's all in one place. In addition to that, let's say that you're going through a documentation effort to get your entire organization much better at standardizing their processes, whether it is for ISO certification or for whatever other reason, your intention is to take all that tribal knowledge your people have accumulated over the years and put it on paper so you can better manage your organization. A process framework helps you keep track of it, helps you plan it, helps you link it between areas. It helps you make sure that you cover all areas of the organization. Once you're done with documentation, you'll be able to look at processes in much more detail, but without losing context. You can see connections between parts of the organization and how the processes connect with each other. In this case, all the rows in the framework either got a process map or were included in a process map, and it was clearly identified what map it was. With this in hand, with these documents in hand, we were able to look at each process and identify any non-value added steps to flag them for elimination. So these tools will allow you to take a look at the inner workings of your organization to make it better, and with that, you're going to get better results. As well as going deep in an organization, you can also take a step back. You can start with the process framework and create a high-level picture of how the organization is working. In this particular case, this organization had a number of processes to try to deliver to different types of customers. With this in front, you can start asking questions like, why are we going, to that part of the market with the same approach as we're going, to this other one? And then, if we were to segment the organization, how would we be able to split? What processes inside of these would be different? A process framework allows you to ask these questions with a document in front, so that you can point and highlight specific items, specific sub-processes, specific inputs, people, risk areas that you need to touch or address or change. Here's another example. If you had an operating model built on your process framework, you could start identifying, hey, these areas here, they would be great candidates for a shared service center. You can start to talk about initiatives of centralization and migration and integration using the specific shape for your business, the current shape, to get it done so that when you're talking about it, it's very clear, it's very specific, and you're doing so in a very deliberate fashion. So with all this in mind, how do we get started? Okay, so there's two ways you can get started. One would be using an inter-industry process framework like the one developed by the folks at APQC, the American Productivity and Quality Center. This is an organization focused on promoting process excellence. In this case, you start with a list that people have already spent a lot of time building up from typical processes for organizations across different industries. Your organization might fit this model readily. Inside of that process framework, you will have a list of activities organized in a hierarchical fashion. As an example, I pulled out an excerpt, similar to the list you saw earlier in the presentation, related to invoicing, collections, etc. In the list to the right, you can see all the activities related to performing revenue accounting. I want you to please notice how it has a shape of an outline, because I'm going to reference this later. Some of the processes listed are related to managing customer credit. Some are about invoicing customers. Some of them are about processing accounts receivable. Some of them are about managing collections, and so on. Inside of these, you will find sub-processes like analyzing credit for new accounts, or reviewing existing accounts, or receiving payments. So you can see how this works. The people at APQC have taken their time in identifying typical processes that you will encounter in this particular area of a business. You can use this readily available list and usually use them as a reference and save you some time. Another way of building your own process framework is to use a tool that Lean and Six Sigma practitioners will be very familiar with. This is the SIPOC, which I will explain in detail soon. But for now, it's sufficient to say that you start by defining the high-level processes of the organization, and then you start to drill down using this tool in a recursive fashion. As I mentioned before, the folks at APQC have done a tremendous job at creating a very well thought out list that you can use as a starting point. I encourage anyone on the webinar to go to that site, take a look around, look at those process frameworks that they've developed, and get started. So let's talk about the SIPOC. So I'll try to explain it here. If you have somebody in your organization that is Lean or Six Sigma trained, they'll be very familiar with this document, because at the core of Six Sigma and Lean thinking is process thinking. The SIPOC is a tool that helps us identify in a conceptual or abstract way what a process entails. In other words, what are the different components of it? What are the inputs that go into the process that turn into outputs? Who are the suppliers that provide these inputs? Who are the customers that benefit from those outputs? All of this gets captured in one page. This document or template, you can use it to drill down and define in further detail any selected process. So it's really useful. You can start with defining all your high-level processes. Let's call this level 1. Then pick a sub-process from level 1 and define it into its own detail, or level 2. This again yields a list of sub-processes, and these will all be level 3s. You can continue in this fashion, getting more and more detail until you're comfortable that you've captured the entire process list for your company and its hierarchy. Here's an example of a SIPOC for a regional retail business. In this example, we have as inputs a product catalog, standard operating procedures, product supply, and as outputs, we're looking for revenue growth and satisfied store customers. Inside of the process, in other words, what turns these inputs into outputs are all those processes you would typically find in a retail operation, like store operations and supply chain processes and merchandising processes and finance and accounting and IT processes and real estate and HR processes, which enable those initial processes to operate. Now, once I've defined this level for that organization, I can follow the same exact process that I used to build this document into some of the sub-processes that get listed here. In this case, I've selected the ones in green, supply chain processes and merchandising processes, for further analysis and detail. So let's take the merchandising process first. So using the exact template that I used before, I start to define the merchandising process and start defining, for instance, that inputs into merchandising are point of sale data and product performance and financial analysis, and the outputs become a product catalog with negotiated prices, a defined supplier base, and maybe the promotions we might run. So who wants these outputs? Well, store operations probably interested in this, as well as regional leadership, and maybe the end customer wants this. And then the question is, how do we turn these inputs into that? Well, with those processes that are listed there, like a catalog management process and a promotions process. Even in this case, we included product sourcing. So again, you would need to do the exercise for your organization because this would be very specific to your organization. But the good thing is that the SciPoc gives you the flexibility of using the same methodology for just about any kind of setting, any kind of process, any kind of situation. Let's take a look at the supply chain process, which I did exactly the same thing. We have defined the supply chain process further here. You could see what some of the inputs are. Merchandising provides to supply chain demand intelligence and POS data, and 3PL that we're using provides the warehousing capabilities the supply chain needs, and the transportation services provider provides transportation capabilities. And by going through those processes, you create an output of a consistent supply of product at the store. And who wants that? Store operations, obviously, and merchandising that's making their plans on that, and supply chain leadership, of course, and the end customer. So, you can see how I define supply chain process much, an additional level of detail. And in this case, just to, take it one more to make sure that we get the gist of how you do this, because this is a recursive exercise, I drilled down one more level. So I took the procurement and replenishment process, for example, and take a look at that and develop the SciPoc for it, and again, adding an additional layer of detail. So this is all about managing and using purchase orders, creating them and sending them, receiving them, and replenishment. The rest of the components of this process as well, all the suppliers that provide those inputs, the outputs of it, and who the customer is. So you can see now how I've taken a high-level business enterprise level process and then drilled it down to sending POs and receiving products. So this is how you use a SciPoc. And we could continue further. The beauty of this is that you can do it as many times as you want, the same method, and it helps you clarify for people what is a process. This way, you're taking all the tribal knowledge that could be ambiguous and making it very specific and putting it on paper. So once you get to the level of detail you're comfortable with, you take all these processes and sub-processes and list them out onto your process framework, and that'll be the first step in defining all the different activities you're involved in. So just to give you an idea of how all of this comes together. So please keep in mind, remember the list from APQC and how that had kind of an outline form. So keep this in mind when I'm going through this. I think it's going to help you picture what I'm trying to describe. So you start at a high level with those initial high-level processes, and then you drill in, right? And you get the first sub-process, level 2 if you want to, and identify what are the sub-processes for that process. Okay, and then you continue to do the same thing in a recursive fashion. You get the sub-process for that, define what the sub-processes are for those, what are the sub-processes here, what are the sub-processes for those, what's the sub-process here, what are the sub-processes for those, and then now you've covered the entire organization. Okay, once you have defined this process list in your process framework, you can start to capture information about each of these different sub-processes. So information like, who's the supervisor for that area, and how do they measure that area, what are the current ongoing projects, what are the key inputs into that process that we need to look into in case we're not performing well, what's the output, is this something that is customer facing or not, how do we, do we need to look into this into this particular process to see if customers are getting the best and highest level of service. So this is the methodology you use to build that process framework. Of course, this is just the initial document that helps you start to put structure around that process thinking, process framework for your organization. At the end, what this exercise does for you is that it yields a comprehensive process framework that describes your current organization and its shape, how it's performing, and ultimately, how are your resources, like your people, your time, your capital, how is it all being used? So, why would you want to know this? Okay, well, using this framework, by doing this, you get a clear picture of both the operation and the organization running it. You understand most internal mechanisms and how they currently perform. You start asking the right questions to drive improvement. You work on the right projects. you embed that expectation of continuous improvement in your organization. And all of this gets geared towards delivering your vision and strategy, delivering on those promises you made. So you might want to ask yourself, what does my current operating model look like, and how is it performing? Is my organization focused on the right things right now? Will my processes be ready to take advantage of upcoming technology that might completely transform my industry? How easy is it to see what changes could help my structure in my organization to align better with the strategy I'm setting out? Auxis can help you answer these questions and take appropriate actions. I encourage you to contact me to qualify, for a complimentary Auxis assessment, and that's my email. I hope that that you get to see the connection between having a process framework and getting your organization to move into process thinking, and the benefits that brings in terms of better alignment behind your strategy, better performance in the side of the inner workings of your organization. I hope I was able to deliver on that intent. So at this point in time, I'm open to questions, I guess.
Thank you, Ricardo. Actually, yes, one of our participants is asking, what are some departments in an organization which tend to be the most challenging and we should stay away from when trying to start with small wins?
Interesting question. Okay. Departments that you shy away with, I wouldn't really shy away from any particular department. I think that culturally some areas are going to jump in a lot quicker than others, just because they're more used to these type of exercises, or they have access to tangible information rather than going and finding out some of the information that you'll be asking from them. Yeah, I think that both operational type of processes like supply chain or distribution or even product development are going to have a lot of the information and documentation ready just because. And then some other areas I've seen that have take a little bit longer in terms of defining what the performance is for a process, or maybe they're not used to thinking of the work that they do from a process perspective, so they might need a little bit of coaching. These areas are typically typically areas like sometimes HR and finance and organizational development. Sales is definitely a challenge. Most folks in sales feel that particular part of the business is more an art form, so that'll be a little bit more a challenge. But I wouldn't shy away from engaging any part of your organization. I would work with all of them. I would probably start with the ones where I feel I would get the most benefit from, or the ones that are the most ambiguous in terms of knowing how do they currently operate. Regulatory affairs, for example, how do those guys operate? So that's that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Ricardo. There's another question here. Are there some average savings that are experienced by most organizations who undertake this process?
I wouldn't dare to say what the average savings are for an exercise like this. I mean, I think the important thing of getting started with a process framework is that you enable the organization to do more and more and more work to get savings, because what happens now is that people start to think of the work that they do as a process inside of another process, an ecosystem of processes that need to interact well. They need to communicate well. They need to flow well. The information needs to flow. The material needs to flow. So, rather than specifying a particular amount, I think the process of working in this fashion generates a continuous stream of savings into the future. And that's what you've seen in those charts with those organizations. They picked up on this early on, and what they've been able to create inside of the organization, inside of the culture and mind of the organization, it's an engine of improvement, an engine of savings. So the savings from 1 year will be dwarfed by the savings in year 5, for example, just because people are able to extract cost savings on top of cost savings as time goes on.
Great. Thank you, Ricardo. It looks like there are no other questions. So if you do have any other questions that you think of after the webinar, please feel free to email Ricardo directly. His email's on the slide. And also, if you're interested in our complimentary assessment, please feel free to reach out to Ricardo as well. So I would like to thank Ricardo and to all of our participants for joining us today. Please watch for our follow-up email with the replay link along with a copy of this presentation. And also, if everyone could please take a moment to complete our brief exit survey. And on behalf of Ricardo and the Auxis team, we thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.